You are awake.
The sound reaches you before the light does. The adhan, the call to prayer, is coming from multiple directions simultaneously, from the minarets of mosques that are distributed across this city, with a density that means you are never more than a few minutes' walk from one of them. Each muezzin's voice is slightly different. Each call begins at a slightly different moment. The result is a layered, overlapping sound that settles over the city, like weather, like the sound of the city, thinking about God, all at once.
You are in Istanbul.
The year is 1550, and Istanbul is the capital of the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire at this moment rules roughly the same territory that the Eastern Roman Empire ruled at its own peak, plus Egypt, plus Syria, plus Iraq, plus the Arabian Peninsula, plus most of North Africa, plus Hungary, plus the Balkans, plus Anatolia, plus the Black Sea coast. It is the largest empire in the world by some measures. It is certainly the empire that most directly confronts Europe, and that Europe most fears and most struggles to understand.
The city itself occupies a peninsula between the Golden Horn and the Sea of Marmara, the narrow landmass where Europe ends and Asia begins, where the Bosphorus narrows to its smallest point and the Black Sea communicates with the Mediterranean. This geographic position, controlling the strait between two continents, sitting at the crossing point of the east-west and north-south trade routes of the known world, is why Constantinople was built here by the Roman Emperor Constantine in 330 AD, and why the Ottomans, having conquered it in 1453, made it their capital immediately. The city is the world's hinge. Whoever holds it holds the point where everything crosses.
Let's begin with what happened in 1453, because you cannot understand this city in 1550 without understanding what it was before.
Constantinople, the city of Constantine, the eastern capital of the Roman Empire. The capital of what historians now call the Byzantine Empire, but what its inhabitants called simply Rome, fell to the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II on the 29th of May, 1453. The city had been the capital of the Christian Roman Empire for over 1,000 years. It held the Hagia Sophia, the greatest church in Christendom, built by the Emperor Justinian in 537 AD, its dome larger than anything Europe would build for another 1,000 years. It held the Hippodrome, where chariot races had been held since the 4th century. It held a tradition of scholarship and bureaucracy, and urban civilization that was the direct, unbroken continuation of Roman governance.
Mehmed II was 21 years old.
He entered the city through the breach his cannon had made in the walls, and he rode to the Hagia Sophia. The church was converted to a mosque that afternoon. Minarets would be added later, and Mehmed prayed in it. He called himself, from that day forward, Caesari Rum, Caesar of Rome, not the conqueror of Rome, the inheritor of Rome, the continuation of the tradition, under new management, with a different religion at its center.
This is the city you are in, a city that carries 2,000 years of continuous history under a new flag.
The morning streets are busy before the light is fully established.
The city in 1550 has been under Ottoman rule for less than a century, and it is, in that century, being remade. Mehmed II had found a city partially depopulated by the siege and by the centuries of decline that preceded it. He actively resettled it, bringing in Muslims from Anatolia, Greeks and Armenians and Jews who had been expelled from or fled other parts of the Ottoman Empire. Sephardic Jews expelled from Spain in 1492, who came to the Ottoman Empire because the Sultan Bayezid II reportedly said that Ferdinand of Spain had impoverished himself and enriched the Sultan by expelling his Jews.
The Istanbul of 1550 is therefore a city of remarkable ethnic and religious diversity, organized spatially by the millet system. the Ottoman practice of organizing non-Muslim communities into self-governing units defined by religion. The Greek Orthodox community, the Armenian Apostolic community, the Jewish communities, the various Catholic communities, each governed their own internal affairs, their marriages and inheritances and religious practices and communal disputes, through their own institutions under the authority of their own religious leaders. What they could not do was compete for political power in the Ottoman state, which was Muslim by definition and constitution.
The city is divided by religion and by geography in ways that overlap but don't coincide. The Galata district across the Golden Horn has traditionally housed the Genoese and other Western European merchants, and continues to be home to a more diverse, more commercially oriented, more cosmopolitan population than the old city on the peninsula. The Jewish community is concentrated in certain neighborhoods, the Greek community in others, the mosques and their surrounding neighborhoods, expanding rapidly under Ottoman patronage, cover more of the old city than they did in 1453, and will cover more still by 1600.
You are walking through the Grand Bazaar.
The Kapalıçarşı, the covered market, was begun under Mehmed Barrio and expanded continuously under his successors. By 1550, it is already one of the largest covered markets in the world, a labyrinth of vaulted stone corridors housing thousands of shops organized by trade, each trade in its own section of the bazaar, each section with its own character and its own sounds and smells, and the particular energy of a place where money changes hands continuously from dawn to dusk.
Textiles. Silk from Persia, cotton from Egypt, wool from the Balkans. The Ottoman silk weaving industry already producing the extraordinary patterned fabrics that will define Ottoman visual culture for centuries. Spices, pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, all the commodities that the Ottoman control of the eastern Mediterranean trade routes makes available to the empire's merchants, and, through them, to Europe. A source of economic power that the European powers will spend the rest of the 16th century trying to circumvent by finding ocean routes to the Spice Islands that don't pass through Ottoman-controlled territory.
Jewelry. Gold and silver worked by craftsmen in the jeweler's bazaar. Precious stones set in the Ottoman style that combines Central Asian steppe motifs with Byzantine decorative traditions, and the new influences coming from Persia and the Arab world. Leather goods, books, coffee, which the Ottomans have made into a social institution through the coffee house. The Kahvehane, a space that does not exist in Europe yet, but which will transform European social life when the institution arrives there in the mid-17th century.
Your first problem is money. The Ottoman currency is the akse, a small silver coin, light, widely distributed, the standard medium of exchange for daily commercial transactions. There are also higher denomination coins for larger transactions. None of them are yours. You have arrived at the most commercially active market in the world, with nothing to spend in it. Your second problem is language. The Ottoman Turkish spoken in Istanbul in 1550 is a literary and administrative language heavily influenced by Arabic and Persian, layered over a Turkic base, written in the Arabic script. It is, by most assessments, one of the most difficult languages in the world to learn quickly, not because of any particular grammatical obstacle, but because the literary register that educated Ottomans speak is so saturated with Arabic and Persian vocabulary that it is nearly incomprehensible even to speakers of simpler Turkic languages. And the Istanbul street Turkish is different again from the literary language, influenced by the Greek and Armenian and Jewish communities who speak it as a second language.
You understand nothing.
But you can walk, and walking through Istanbul in 1550 is itself an education.
The Hagia Sophia dominates the skyline from everywhere, its massive dome and the 4 minarets that have been added around it visible from almost anywhere in the city. Around it, the Sultan Suleiman is building,
He is building mosques and schools and hospitals and caravanserais, the roadside hotels that the Ottoman state built along major roads to facilitate travel and commerce, at a rate and scale that his own century finds remarkable. His court architect, Mimar Sinan, will design over 300 buildings during his career, including the Süleymaniye Mosque complex that is visible from here. Under construction in 1550, the mosque and its attached school and hospital and market and cemetery and caravanserai, forming a single planned complex that the Ottomans called a kuliye, a charitable foundation. And that provided for the religious and educational and medical and commercial needs of an entire neighborhood simultaneously.
Sinan is by any measure one of the greatest architects who ever lived. He will build until he is 90 years old. His masterwork, the Selimiye Mosque in Edirne, which he will build in the 1570s when he is in his 80s, is still standing. It is still considered by many architects to be the most perfectly proportioned dome building ever constructed.
Let's talk about the coffee house.
Coffee reached Istanbul from Yemen sometime in the early 16th century, and by 1550 the kahvehane, the coffee house, has become one of the defining institutions of Ottoman urban life. There are perhaps 600 of them in Istanbul. They are open from early morning to late at night. They serve coffee, bitter, strong, boiled in small copper pots over charcoal, served in small cups with no handles, and nothing else except conversation.
The coffee house is a social revolution in a cup. Before it, the primary social spaces for men outside the home were the mosque and the market. The mosque was for prayer and religious instruction. The market was for commerce. The coffee house was for neither. It was for sitting, for talking, for listening to music, for playing backgammon, for hearing news and rumors and poetry and political gossip. It was a public space with no commercial purpose except the coffee itself, and the coffee was cheap enough that almost anyone could afford to spend hours there.
The Ottoman religious establishment was deeply suspicious of coffee houses. Not of coffee per se, though the question of whether coffee was intoxicating and therefore prohibited under Islamic law was debated with considerable energy, but of what coffee houses facilitated. People sitting around, talking, with no productive purpose. People criticizing the government, the religious establishment, the Sultan. People needing across class lines in a space that had no hierarchy except who arrived first and got the best seat by the fire. Coffee houses were periodically banned. They always reopened. The social need they served was too real and too widely felt to be suppressed by decree. By the mid-17th century, coffee houses had traveled to Europe with Ottoman merchants and diplomats, and within a generation the coffee houses of London and Paris and Vienna were producing the same phenomenon. Bourgeois public space, news exchange, the intellectual culture of the Enlightenment brewed in a cup.
The Enlightenment was caffeinated. The Ottoman Empire provided the caffeine.
Walking back through the bazaar toward the old city, you pass through the edges of the Jewish quarter.
The Sephardic Jews who arrived from Spain in 1492 brought with them skills and knowledge that the Ottoman Empire needed. Printing, the Hebrew printing press, established in Istanbul within years of their arrival, was the first printing press in the Ottoman Empire, decades before the first Arabic script press was established. Medical knowledge. Many of the expelled Jews were physicians, and several served as court physicians to Ottoman sultans. Commercial networks. The Sephardic Jewish community maintained connections with their former co-religionists across Europe, connections that made them valuable intermediaries in the trade between the Ottoman Empire and the European powers.
They also brought the Spanish language, Judeo-Spanish, Ladino, the Spanish of the 15th century, preserved in the Jewish communities of the Ottoman Balkans and Anatolia, was still being spoken by the descendants of the 1492 expulsion in the early 20th century, a language, frozen at the moment of expulsion,
carrying the vocabulary and pronunciation of a Spain that had expelled the people who kept it alive.
Good night. For now. Second morning.
The man who sits on the throne of the Ottoman Empire in 1550 has been ruling for 30 years and will rule for another 16. He came to power at 26. He will die on campaign at 71, of old age or illness, in his tent during a siege of a Hungarian fortress, and his death will be concealed from the army for 2 days, so that the battle could be concluded without the troops knowing their sultan was gone.
His name is Suleiman. His people call him Kanuni, the Lawgiver. Europe calls him the Magnificent.
Let's talk about what Suleiman actually did, because the epithet magnificent suggests spectacle, and the epithet lawgiver suggests administration, and the reality is that both are true, and the combination is what made him extraordinary.
On the military side, Suleiman expanded the Ottoman Empire to its greatest extent. He captured Belgrade in 1521. He destroyed the Hungarian army at the Battle of Mohacs in 1526 and installed a puppet king in Buda. He besieged Vienna in 1529, the siege that failed, the high-water mark of Ottoman expansion in Europe. The moment that Europe treats as the narrowest escape from incorporation into the empire. He captured Rhodes from the Knights of St. John. He fought the Safavid Persian Empire to the east repeatedly, capturing Baghdad in 1534. He controlled the Red Sea and contested the Indian Ocean trade routes with the Portuguese. On the administrative side, Suleiman reorganized Ottoman law. The empire's legal system was complex. Islamic Sharia law governing matters of personal status and religion, supplemented by Kanun law, the secular law that the Sultan promulgated to govern commercial and criminal matters that the Sharia did not clearly address. Suleiman systematized the Kanun, created a comprehensive code that was applied consistently across the empire, and reduced the arbitrary power of local officials to interpret law in their own favor. This is why his own people called him Kanuni, the law. The regularity of rule under clear and consistent law.
The Ottoman state at Suleiman's peak is one of the most sophisticated governmental structures in the world.
The Sultan sits at the apex. Below him, the Grand Vizier runs the day-to-day administration. The Sultan's representative, the effective Prime Minister, who manages the Imperial Council called the Divan that meets 4 times a week to hear cases, issue orders, receive ambassadors, and conduct the business of governing 30 million people across 3 continents. The Grand Vizier is the most powerful person in the empire after the Sultan, and the office was occupied in Suleiman's reign by a remarkable sequence of able men, several of whom were of devşirme origin, meaning they had been born Christian, converted to Islam, trained in the palace school, and risen to the highest position in the imperial government.
The Divan met in the Topkapı Palace, behind a grill through which the Sultan could watch the proceedings without being seen. The Sultan's physical invisibility was part of the Ottoman conception of imperial dignity. The Sultan was too powerful, too sacred, to be visible to ordinary supplicants. His presence was a rumor, a weight, felt but not demonstrated. The Grand Vizier presented the Divan's decisions to him afterward, in the inner chambers of the palace that almost no outsider ever entered.
Let's talk about Hürrem Sultan, because any account of Suleiman that omits her is incomplete.
Hürrem was born, probably in what is now Ukraine, probably in the 1500s, of Ruthenian or possibly Polish origin, and was enslaved and brought to the Ottoman palace as a concubine, probably in the early 1520s. She rose to become Suleiman's favorite, and then, in a step that broke centuries of Ottoman tradition, his legal wife. Ottoman sultans did not marry their concubines. The imperial harem was a system specifically designed to produce heirs without the political complications of wives with their own families, their own loyalties, their own claims.
Suleiman married Hürrem anyway,
and she became, for the rest of her life, his closest advisor and one of the most powerful political figures in the empire. She outlived the most powerful Ottoman officials of her era, including the Grand Vizier Ibrahim Pasha, who had been Suleiman's closest friend since childhood, whose execution she is widely believed to have engineered. She managed the succession politics of the imperial household with a skill and a ruthlessness that the Venetian ambassadors, who were among the most acute observers of Ottoman court life, reported on with careful admiration and considerable fear.
She also built mosques and hospitals, and a public bathhouse in Istanbul, and a religious complex in Jerusalem, and a caravanserai on the Silk Road in Anatolia. Her charitable foundations were genuine and substantial. She was simultaneously a political operator and a patron of public welfare, which is probably the most accurate description of any powerful person in any era.
You cannot enter the Topkapı Palace. The outer courtyard where the imperial kitchens are and where various services are conducted is accessible to people with business there, and you have no business there. And the guards at the gate make this clear with an economy of expression that requires no common language. You stand outside and look at the walls.
The palace complex covers approximately 700,000 square meters of the tip of the Istanbul Peninsula, the highest ground, commanding views of the Bosphorus on one side, the Sea of Marmara on another, and the Golden Horn on the third. It houses not just the Sultan and his household, but an administrative apparatus of 10,000 people, officials, clerks, servants, guards, the students of the palace school, the women of the harem and their attendants, the janissary guards, the craftsmen and musicians and physicians and astronomers who serve the court.
The Ottoman imperial household was, in the 16th century, one of the largest single employers in the world.
The Ottoman system of governance produced something that no other empire of this era had quite achieved: a state apparatus that could function even with a weak sultan at the top.
The Abbasid Caliphate had collapsed when its caliphs were reduced to figureheads. The Byzantine Empire had spent centuries in civil war whenever a strong emperor was not available to hold it together. The Holy Roman Empire in 1550 is famously neither holy nor Roman, nor an empire in any coherent administrative sense. The Ottoman Empire, by contrast, had by Suleiman's reign developed institutions: the Divan, the Grand Vizier's office, the provincial administration, the Janissary Corps, that could operate independently of the Sultan's personal attention.
This meant the empire could survive bad sultans. And it would need to, because after Suleiman the quality of Ottoman sultans declined. Not immediately, not uniformly, but on average. Suleiman's son Selim II was competent but unambitious. Murad III ruled for 21 years but spent most of it in the harem, fathering an extraordinary number of children and leaving most governance to his officials. The empire did not collapse. The institutions carried it.
The institutions also, over time, became their own problem. The Janissaries, who had been the empire's most effective military force, became, by the 17th century, a vested interest resistant to military reform. The devşirme system declined as Janissary positions became hereditary, inherited rather than earned. The law code that Suleiman had standardized began to accumulate exceptions and local variations that eroded its consistency.
But in 1550, none of this has happened yet. In 1550, the institutions are working. The Divan meets. The records are kept. The tax collectors collect. The roads are maintained. The empire functions with the grinding efficiency of a bureaucracy that has been doing the same things for a century and knows how to do them.
You cannot enter the Topkapı Palace. The outer courtyard where the imperial kitchens are and where various services are conducted is accessible to people with business there, and you have no business there.
and the guards at the gate make this clear with an economy of expression that requires no common language. You stand outside and look at the walls.
The palace complex covers approximately 700,000 square meters of the tip of the Istanbul Peninsula, the highest ground, commanding views of the Bosphorus on one side, the Sea of Marmara on another, and the Golden Horn on the third. It houses not just the Sultan and his household, but an administrative apparatus of 10,000 people, officials, clerks, servants, guards, the students of the palace school, the women of the harem and their attendants, the janissary guards, the craftsmen and musicians and physicians and astronomers who serve the court.
Across from where you are standing, on the third hill of the city, the Suleymaniye Mosque complex is under construction. You can see the scaffolding. You can hear, very faintly when the wind is right, the sounds of stonecutters and workers. The mosque itself is nearly finished. It will be completed in 1557, 7 years from now. But the surrounding kuliye, the complex of schools, hospital, caravanserai, shops and cemetery that will make it a self-contained neighborhood, is still being built.
Mimar Sinan? The imperial architect is in his 50s in 1550 and at the height of his powers. He was himself probably of devşirme origin, born in Anatolia to a Christian family, taken into the palace system, trained as a military engineer before he was recognized as something more. He served on campaigns throughout the empire, building bridges and fortifications and siege works, learning from every structure he encountered. He did not begin designing major buildings until his 40s.
He will not stop until he is 90.
The Suleymaniye is not even his masterwork. His masterwork is still 3 decades away. The Selimiye Mosque in Edirne, which he will design in his 80s, and which he himself considered his finest achievement. The dome spanning a distance that exceeds the Hagia Sophia's dome, achieved with a structural elegance that the Byzantine builders of the Hagia Sophia had managed only through massive supporting half-domes that Sinan considered inelegant. He solved the structural problem differently. He will write that with the Selimiye, he has finally matched the Hagia Sophia. Others will argue he exceeded it.
The Hagia Sophia is visible from where you are standing. The Suleymaniye is under construction behind you. In a few decades, the Selimiye will be built in Edirne. The Ottoman Empire in the 16th century is doing with stone and light what the Abbasid Empire did with ink and paper, building the most ambitious version of something human beings have ever attempted, knowing it will be compared to everything that came before, trying to make it last.
Good night.
Third morning.
Let's talk about the devşirme, because it is the most unusual institution in the Ottoman Empire and possibly in the history of governance, and because understanding it requires setting aside most of what you think you know about how states and societies normally work.
The devşirme was a tax paid in people.
Specifically, every few years, Ottoman officials traveled through the Christian villages of the Balkans, Bulgaria, Greece, Serbia, Albania, Bosnia, and selected boys between the ages of roughly 8 and 18. Not all boys. The selection criteria favored the intelligent, the healthy, the physically capable, the psychologically resilient. The boys were taken from their families, converted to Islam, and brought to Istanbul. The most promising were selected for the palace school, the Enderun, and began a decade or more of intensive education in Islamic theology, Turkish and Arabic and Persian languages, mathematics, music, horsemanship, archery, swordsmanship, and the specific arts of Ottoman administration. The rest were sent to Anatolian farming families to learn Turkish, and eventually joined the military.
The graduates of the palace school became the janissaries and the Ottoman administrative class.
The janissaries. From Janissary, new soldiers, were the elite infantry of the Ottoman army, the best trained and best equipped professional soldiers in the world,
in the 15th and 16th centuries. They were also, until the reforms of later centuries, exclusively devşirme in origin. Men who had been taken from Christian families as boys, converted, trained, and formed into a military institution of remarkable discipline and effectiveness. They were the troops who broke the walls of Constantinople in 1453. They were the troops who held the line at the many battles that built and defended the empire.
The graduates of the Enderun who went into administration became the empire's highest officials. Grand Viziers, provincial governors, court officials. Many of the most powerful figures in the Ottoman state in the 16th century were of devşirme origin. Ibrahim Pasha, Suleiman's Grand Vizier and closest companion, was born in Greece. Sokolu Mehmed Pasha, who served as Grand Vizier under Suleiman's successors, was born in Bosnia. Piale Pasha, the admiral who commanded the Ottoman fleet at its most powerful, was Hungarian or Croatian in origin.
The sons of Muslim Ottoman families, the Turkish and Arab and Kurdish and other Muslim subjects of the empire, were largely excluded from the highest positions of the Ottoman state. Those positions were reserved for the devşirme, for the men who had been taken from non-Muslim families and remade into Ottoman officials.
Why?
The logic is counterintuitive but coherent. Officials of Muslim family origin had their own family networks, their own tribal and regional loyalties, their own inherited status and claims. An official from a powerful Muslim family was a potential rival, someone with a base of power outside the Sultan's gift. A devşirme official had nothing except what the Sultan had given him. His family was Christian and in the Balkans. His religion, his name, his education, his career, his power, all of it came from the palace, from the Sultan, from the Ottoman system. He had no other loyalty to offer and no other source of power to fall back on.
This made him paradoxically more trustworthy, not more virtuous. Devshirme officials were as capable of corruption and self-dealing as anyone, but more structurally dependent, more bound to the system, and the system therefore more bound to him. Because a man who has given his entire life to a single institution deserves, in the Ottoman understanding, the institution's reciprocal commitment.
From the outside, the devşirme looks monstrous. Children taken from their families, communities required to provide sons to a state that will convert them, parents who may never see their children again, or who see them return decades later as strangers in Muslim robes, speaking a language the family no longer shares.
The historical reality is more complicated, as it always is.
Some families resisted. Some managed to exempt their sons through bribes or influence. But in some communities, particularly in the Balkans, where Christian families had limited paths to power and prosperity under Ottoman rule, the devşirme was understood as a path. A son taken might become a janissary officer, might become a governor, might become someone whose family connection to power could benefit the whole village. The Ottoman records show cases of families petitioning to have their sons included in the devşirme selection, arguing that their boy was suitable, requesting that he be taken.
Power has a gravity. Even a system designed to create dependence can be worked by the people it depends on, if they understand its logic well enough.
You are standing near the Enderun, the palace school, which you cannot enter, but whose existence you can feel in the young men moving in and out of the palace complex, some of them in the distinctive uniforms of the various court services, some carrying documents, some clearly students still in the education phase of a career that will take decades to reach its destinations.
One of them meets your eyes for a moment. He is perhaps 16, dark-haired, his features suggesting southeastern European origin. He has been in the palace school for, perhaps, 8 years. He has forgotten whatever language he spoke at home, or pushed it into a place in his memory where it doesn't interfere with the Turkish and Arabic and Persian he needs for his examinations. He has a career in front of him that the boy he was at 8 could not have imagined.
He looks at you with the mild curiosity of someone who has learned to assess people quickly and has assessed you as irrelevant to his purposes. And he moves on.
The devşirme system also produced something unexpected. A class of men who were simultaneously products of the Ottoman state and connected, through memory and sometimes through ongoing family contact, to the communities from which they came.
Sokolu Mehmed Pasha, who will become Grand Vizier in the 1560s after Suleiman's death and hold the position for 14 years across the reigns of 3 sultans, was born in Bosnia. He maintained contact with his Serbian Orthodox family throughout his life. When the Serbian Patriarchate of Peć was restored in 1557, his brother was appointed the first patriarch. A converted Muslim Grand Vizier, the effective head of the Ottoman government, used his influence to restore the institution of his original faith for the community he had been taken from.
This is not hypocrisy. It is the complexity of what the devşirme actually produced. Men who were genuinely Ottoman, genuinely permitted to the empire that had made them, and who also carried somewhere the memory of where they had come from, and sometimes used their power to help those communities.
The system was not experienced the same way by everyone it touched. Some devşirme boys never recovered from the separation. Some thrived in a way that would have been impossible had they stayed. Some died in the palace school. Some became pashas who built mosques in the towns where they were born. The historical record contains all of these stories, and the attempt to reduce it to a single verdict, good or evil, opportunity or abduction, misses the thing that history is always trying to tell you, that the lives of real people don't fit into single verdicts.
There is another elite in the Ottoman Empire that the devşirme system did not touch.
The ulama, the Islamic scholarly class, the men trained in Islamic law and theology and Quranic interpretation, were the religious counterweight to the devşirme administrative class. Where the devşirme officials were converted Christians remade as Muslim Ottomans, the ulema were Muslim by birth, Arab or Turkish or Kurdish or Persian, educated in the madrasa tradition that connected Istanbul's religious schools to the 1,000-year tradition of Islamic scholarship. The ulama provided the religious legitimacy that made Ottoman rule more than mere force. The Shaykhul Islam, the chief Islamic legal authority, the head of the ulema, was the only official in the Ottoman Empire who could not be appointed or dismissed at the Sultan's whim, without religious consequences. His rulings, the fetvas that declared whether a proposed action was permissible under Islamic law, were politically significant. A fetva declaring a war religiously legitimate was a valuable tool. A fetva declaring a sultan's actions impermissible was politically dangerous.
Suleiman's relationship with his Shaykhul Islam, Ebu Suud Effendi, was one of the most productive collaborations in Ottoman legal history. Ebu Suud produced the religious justifications for Suleiman's canon law, the secular administrative law that technically sat outside the Sharia, by framing the canon as consistent with Islamic principles. He also produced fetvas on an enormous range of practical questions. Whether coffee was permitted, whether certain commercial practices were permissible, whether the killing of certain categories of people in war was religiously acceptable. His fetvas fill multiple volumes. They are the religious half of the legal framework that Suleiman spent his reign building.
The tension between the devşirme administrative class and the ulema religious class, between the converted pragmatists and the born scholars, between the men who ran the empire and the men who defined its religious legitimacy, was one of the structural tensions of the Ottoman system for the entire period of its existence. Neither side could function without the other. Neither side fully trusted the other. The balance between them was one of the things Suleiman managed with particular skill.
Good night.
This is the last night. The Ottoman Empire that you have been walking through for a week is in 1550 at its absolute peak. Suleiman has been sultan for 30 years. The territories are at their greatest extent. The architecture is at its most ambitious. The law has been recently codified. The military is the most effective in the world. The court is producing poetry and music and calligraphy and illuminated manuscripts of a quality that makes Istanbul a cultural capital as well as a political one. From this peak, the empire will not fall quickly. It will last, in some form, until 1922, another 370 years. The Ottoman Empire, even in its final, diminished form, outlasted every other institution visible from this terrace in 1550. It outlasted the Venetian Republic. It outlasted the Holy Roman Empire. It outlasted the Spanish Empire in America. It outlasted almost everything that feared it in this century.
But it will change. Everything changes.
Let's talk about the 1529 siege of Vienna, because Europe in 1550 is still living in its shadow.
In the summer of 1529, Suleiman led an Ottoman army of perhaps 100,000 men north from Istanbul through the Balkans, through Hungary, which the Ottomans had effectively controlled since Mohacs 3 years earlier, and into Austria. The army arrived before Vienna in late September. It besieged the city for 2.5 weeks.
Then it left.
The siege failed. In the most technical sense, Vienna was not taken. The reasons are still debated. The Ottoman supply lines were stretched past their effective limit. The season was advancing toward winter, which made extended operations dangerous. The defensive preparations Vienna had made were more formidable than expected. The Ottoman army was not defeated in the field. It simply ran out of the campaign season and withdrew.
Europe did not interpret it this way. Europe interpreted it as a miracle, as a narrow escape from the absorption of Christendom's eastern frontier into an Islamic empire, as the moment when God protected Vienna, and through Vienna, everything beyond it.
The psychological impact lasted for a century. The fear of the Ottomans, real, grounded in the very real military power that had destroyed every army sent against it for a century, shaped European politics, European religious unity or lack thereof, European attitudes toward the Ottoman Empire and toward Islam for generations. When Martin Luther was asked whether Christians should resist the Ottoman advance, he said famously that they should not, because God was using the Turks as punishment for Christian sin. This was not a popular position, but the degree to which it was debated tells you how present the Ottoman Empire was in European consciousness.
The Ottoman navy deserves a moment.
Under Suleiman, the Ottoman fleet was commanded by Hayreddin Barbarossa, a figure so remarkable that his biography sounds like fiction. Born on the Greek island of Lesbos, probably to a Turkish father and a Greek or Albanian mother, he became a corsair in the western Mediterranean with his brother Arouj, fighting against Spanish naval power in the service of the North African coastal principalities. When Arouj was killed, Hayreddin placed himself under Ottoman suzerainty, offering control of the Algerian coast in exchange for Ottoman military support. Suleiman made him Grand Admiral of the Ottoman fleet.
Hayreddin Barbarossa then reorganized, rebuilt, and retrained the Ottoman navy, and led it to victory against the combined Habsburg-Venetian-Genoese fleet at the Battle of Preveza in 1538. A victory that gave the Ottomans control of the eastern Mediterranean for the next 30 years. He raided the coasts of Italy and Spain. He freed Muslim slaves from Christian vessels. He destroyed Christian fleets. He died in Istanbul in 1546, 4 years before your visit, of natural causes, at perhaps 70 years old, which for a man who had spent his entire life at sea in combat was itself remarkable.
The Ottoman control of the Mediterranean trade routes in the mid-16th century is one of the economic drivers of the European age of exploration. The Portuguese, the Spanish, the English, the Dutch, all seeking ocean routes to Asia that bypass the Ottoman toll gates, the circumnavigation of Africa, the crossing of the Atlantic, the colonization of the Americas, all of it driven, partly, by the need to find a way around the empire that controls the most direct routes.
The Ottoman Empire, by being powerful, accidentally created the conditions for European global expansion.
You have been here 1 week. You have not spoken a word anyone understood. You have not been able to read a single sign or document. You have walked through the Grand Bazaar without spending a coin and through the streets without a destination, and watched the most powerful empire in the world conduct its daily business.
Here is what you have seen.
A city of 500,000 people organized around mosques and markets, and the weight of a palace on a hill. A legal system that Suleiman has spent his reign making consistent and fair by the standards of its era. An administrative class built from boys, taken from their families, and remade into something unprecedented. Officials without inherited loyalties, bound to the state alone. An army built on the same principle. The Janissaries who converted and drilled and fought with a discipline that no conscript army could match. A naval force that had turned the Mediterranean into an Ottoman lake.
And at the edges, the signs of what will eventually change everything. The Portuguese ships rounding Africa, the Spanish ships crossing the Atlantic, silver from American mines beginning to flow into the European economy, eventually inflating the Ottoman economy from outside in ways no Istanbul official yet understands. The Janissaries who will, by the next century, be admitted to the children of Janissaries rather than devşirme boys, inheriting their positions rather than earning them, becoming an inherited aristocracy rather than a meritocratic instrument, and gradually losing the characteristics that made them exceptional.
Institutions decline when they stop doing the thing that made them powerful. This is not a law of nature. It is just a pattern that keeps repeating. You have been here 1 week. You have not spoken a word anyone understood. You have not been able to read a single sign or document. You have walked through the Grand Bazaar without spending a coin and through the streets without a destination, and watched the most powerful empire in the world conduct its daily business.
Here is what you have seen.
A city of 500,000 people organized around mosques and markets, and the weight of a palace on a hill. A legal system that Suleiman has spent his reign making consistent and fair by the standards of its era. An administrative class built from boys, taken from their families, and remade into something unprecedented. Officials without inherited loyalties, bound to the state alone. An army built on the same principle. The Janissaries who converted and drilled and fought with a discipline that no conscript army could match. A naval force that had turned the Mediterranean into an Ottoman lake. An architectural tradition that is, in this decade, producing some of the most ambitious and beautiful stone buildings in human history.
And at the edges, the signs of what will eventually change everything. The Portuguese ships rounding Africa, the Spanish ships crossing the Atlantic, silver from American mines beginning to flow into the European economy, eventually inflating the Ottoman economy from outside in ways no Istanbul official yet understands. The Janissaries who will, by the next century, be admitted to the children of Janissaries rather than devşirme boys, inheriting their positions rather than earning them, becoming an inherited aristocracy rather than a meritocratic instrument, and gradually losing the characteristics that made them exceptional.
Institutions decline when they stop doing the thing that made them powerful. This is not a law of nature. It is just a pattern that keeps repeating.
The Ottoman Empire will last until 1922. 372 more years from where you are standing. It will lose Hungary and most of the Balkans. It will fight and lose wars with Russia, with Austria, with France, with Britain, with its own provincial governors who become more powerful than the center. It will attempt reform after reform. The Tanzimat, the constitutional experiments, the military modernization. Each one coming slightly too late to reverse the structural shifts already in motion.
It will be called, in the 19th century, the sick man of Europe. A phrase attributed to the Russian Tsar Nicholas. The phrase is condescending and inaccurate. The Ottoman state in the 19th century was not so much sick as transforming, trying to find a form that could survive in a world of European nation-states and industrial economies that had developed while the Ottomans were managing the consequences of 17th century stagnation. The transformation did not succeed quickly enough, but the attempt was real.
The empire ended not in conquest, but in exhaustion. A decade of continuous war, from the Balkan Wars of 1912-1913 through the First World War, in which the Ottoman military fought on multiple fronts and lost, and in which the empire's remaining territories were partitioned by the European powers. The Turkish Republic that emerged from the ruins in 1923 under Mustafa Kemal Ataturk was explicitly not the continuation of the Ottoman Empire. It was something new.
But Istanbul remained Istanbul. The mosques that Sinan built are still standing. The Grand Bazaar is still open. The Bosphorus still runs between the continents, and whoever controls the strait where Europe ends and Asia begins still controls the hinge of the world.
Some things outlast the empires that built them.
The Adhan begins.
Not the last prayer of the night, the first prayer of the morning. The voices of the muezzins rising from a dozen minarets across the city. The same words in the same Arabic that a muezzin called in 630 AD in Medina. The same sound that has been rising over this city since 1453 and will continue rising for 5 more centuries.
Hayya Allah al-Salah. Come to prayer.
The city stirs.
The light is beginning.
Good night, good night.